Let's face it, parenting is the most important job on earth. Every day presents a stack of different challenges, and more often than not, the answer is outside of the box. On this podcast, we will offer proven strategies, interview pioneers in education, give insights into how to be successful parents, and even share our imperfect experiences of being parents ourselves. We're all in on this journey, and we will span the globe to find out what is working and who has the answers. This is the Sound Foundations for Parenting podcast. Here are your hosts, Darren McCarthy and Brian Powers.
Welcome to the Sound Foundations for Parenting podcast. I'm Brian Powers.
And I'm Darren McCarthy. Today we venture out to San Diego, California.
Talking to Crystal Sanford. Crystal is the owner of Sanford Autism Consulting. 20 years experience as a public school clinician, an IEP team member, and really took that experience and turned herself into an advocate for parents. Herself being a fellow autism parent with her daughter, she explains to us, how basically, Darren, she wants to fight and help bring the rights of the parents to the table.
Well, she's got a really unique background as well, because she's first of all, she's a speech pathologist, right? Second of all, she's seen what her daughter has needed and supported that. She's obviously, after talking to her, really kind of rounded out her background. So she's not just thinking from a perspective of a parent or a speech pathologist. She's obviously done a lot of legwork because she sees things from that kind of like that whole child perspective. We use that word gestalt. It's the whole child. Really, really unique in that way, and really helpful from a perspective of an IEP. That was great stuff, wasn't it?
It was. Like I say in the episode, kind of personal connection to it and what I'm going through. And it's like, I love how she said, the IEP is kind of like the business plan or for equivalent for your child. You have to be their CEO. And it's something I've said, I say when I sit down with the kids' teachers and this and the other thing, I said, you got to pardon me because I'll bring a business mentality to the table when we're talking about education, and often that's not the case. But she definitely drives that point home, and it really resonated for me.
And she talks about the use of acronyms and how you have very specialized individuals that use specialized language, and that what you have to do as a parent is kind of soak all that in. And you're not really ready to leave the process until you have the ability to explain it to someone else. And then the other piece was, not going there by yourself. And I hear that a lot from parents is that, if a lot of times one parent might be working, or it might be a single parent situation. So you walk into this room all by yourself, and you've got all these professionals around a table, and it's super intimidating. So I loved her concept of just, bring a friend, bring a relative, bring somebody else so that you don't feel alone in this whole process.
Yeah, second set of ears and eyes, something that, you may have missed, they catch. It's huge. And the other big thing is that, she was talking about how getting quality data and using that data for measurable results. Often she said we get caught down in the minutia of let's get all the quality data on your child, all the evaluations. They write up this big plan, but all right, what's the plan? What's on the other side of it? What are we looking to do? What are the goals realistic? And she said, the other thing she said to us is that you gotta know that you can go back to the table 2, 3, 4 times, as many times as you need. If you're not comfortable with that plan. Yeah,
she's really if we were in San Diego, I would be working with her because she has team. just in the sense because the children that we were working with out there, and the idea, she's such a kind of like a calm personality.
Yep.
And that's so important in that process because it's a very emotional process for parents. And then we start to talk about labels and what are you going to do for my child? What are you not going to do? And really you get stirred up, and she's so knowledgeable, but yet so calm. And I think that comes from, the experience of the process and having gone through it like personally and professionally. I think that she brings a lot to the table that way.
No, and look, these notes and the companion to this episode are going to be chock full of resources. So it's important that you get over to our website, soundfoundationsforparenting.net. Easy process. Give us your email address. You'll be able to download the companion to this episode. Show notes will definitely be within this episode as well. And with giving us that email address, you're going to get a bunch of updates and cool things that we have going on, and we're absolutely going to share all the resources and content that we get our hands on as well to make you the best advocate for your child. Awesome. So let's get at it. We'll talk to Crystal Sanford, and we are excited to have Crystal Sanford with us today from Sanford Autism Consulting. Welcome, Crystal.
Thank you for having me.
Crystal is advocating strong for children with autism and in their fight for the IEP process and starting the IEP process. So, Crystal, why don't you kind of explain to us, who you are, your background, and then, kind of what got you into this consulting as well.
Sure. I have always had a love for kids, and early on I thought, maybe I want to be a teacher. And then I thought, no, I don't think I want to manage 25, 30 kids at one time. Luckily, or however you want to say it, I stumbled upon the field of speech pathology. And so I've actually been a speech pathologist now for over 20 years, and I've served all kinds of kids and all kinds of abilities. But autism really, over the past 12 years or so, has really caught my eye. I really love working with those kids, and I love their quirkiness and all their intricacies, idiosyncrasies. So that is what was really interesting me in recent years. And then, surprise, we had our first child, and around 18 months, I started suspecting, something's going on with this kiddo. Something's different. And so you want to say, it's first child, and, I'm a speech pathologist, maybe I'm overthinking this, but I just couldn't shake that. And finally at 3.5, she was diagnosed with autism. And it was a bit of a relief for me, to find out, like, okay, this is something. I'm not crazy here. There is something going on. But also to know that there was good services and there was good outcomes for kids who had early intervention. So, I just jumped on that, and, I know speech therapists. And so a lady that I know that was really great in the area of serving little ones with autism, she became my daughter's therapist, and she really was able to really work wonders with her. And in the back of my mind, I'd always been thinking about, maybe I'll start a private practice one day. But when this happened, this was really like the aha moment for me, because I realized, had I not already had my background, I would have been devastated, overwhelmed, and just wouldn't know what to do when it came to having a child with special needs. Right. So I said, this is it. This is what I'm going to do. So that really was the impetus for me to start my practice, so that I could help other families understand the IEP process and have hope. That's really, the goal of my practice, is to bring hope to families.
Yeah, and good for you, to really see that calling. That was kind of brought together with kind of working with your own child.
Yeah.
Are you doing speech by yourself, or do you have any other therapists with you? Or
so I've continued to do part-time in the public schools, providing services. I also provide some social groups for kids at a private high school. And then the rest of my practice is the IEP advocacy, which I do. And I also teach a class, kind of an IEP 101 for parents, a 6-hour class that is funded through regional centers, so that parents can come for free and get this knowledge as well.
So you want to fly to New York? Is that what I'm hearing? That sounds fantastic.
Yeah. Have PowerPoint. We'll travel.
And what is it? I see something called special lists. What's the premise of that?
So that is a new fairly new organization, Wolf and Friends. It's an app that was developed by two moms of kids with special needs who wanted to build a tribe and build camaraderie and fellowship and unite resources for parents with special needs. So they developed that app, and then they started looking for specialists who maybe even had a personal connection, who were willing to be resources on the app and provide articles and suggestions and support. And so, they reached out to me, and I said, definitely, I would love to be able to do that. And so, I'm a part of that network.
So you're really, I mean, you're giving parents kind of that, experience that you have, not only your experience they had personally, but your experience that you have from working, in the school systems, your educational background, and really giving them, quote unquote, a leg up when they come into this process.
That is my goal, and I tell parents, if you choose to hire me as your advocate, my goal is for you to need me for one time, for one IEP cycle. And I hope to empower you with knowledge, information, and all that you would need, so that the next time you have an IEP meeting, you wouldn't need my help, because you would have the resources that you need to advocate for your child yourself the next time.
So I shared with you before we started recording, we're going through this literally this week with my 8-year-old, and starting the IEP interview and process. And one thing I didn't say was walking into that room with, half a dozen folks from the school who are there to help. But, my kind of business acumen is, okay, what's our goal? Where are we going with this? And my thought process after the fact was, what about someone that comes into this and is, not in that mindset, or, needs that helping hand, that advocacy? You're 100% right. Where do they get that? And it's, it's amazing that you're doing that.
Yeah. And that is what I hope to provide to parents, because I've been that person on that team of 6, 7, 8 people, and the parent walks in, and it's like deer in headlights sometimes. You're just there because this is what you're supposed to do, and then people start spitting out all these acronyms, and you're just signing papers and not understanding. And there's only so much that I could do as a district employee in that regard. And so that's why I felt like in my business I would be able to do that, to be that person. I tell parents, go to your meetings, and then bring back your IEP to me. I go through the IEP. I do an audit with a fine-tooth comb, and then we request a second meeting where I actually go with the parents, and we use my analysis as the agenda for the next meeting.
Sure.
And so they feel they feel heard. I had a mom who said, my husband never talks when he comes to these meetings. He never says a word. And he actually made comments. And I think it was because he felt like that somebody was on their side, and he felt like his voice was going to be heard this time. So,
the process is very, very intimidating. I mean, just to go in, we've done the 504 plan.
Okay.
Right. So it's just, you're sitting there, and I have background and I kind of understand some of the acronyms, but even so, now you're sitting with your child.
Yes.
Right. And so you have all the emotion and all the objectivity is kind of washed out the window.
Yeah.
And now you're staring at, usually the occupational therapist and the speech pathologist and all these different people from different corners of the building.
Right.
What's your thought on kind of how to relax in that environment, or how do you, just that initial moment?
So one thing that I tell parents to do is to ask for a copy of the document ahead of time.
Yeah.
So that it's not your first time seeing that information. You can kind of pour over it a little bit. Legally, it's not a requirement for them to give you that, but when you ask for it, it is a courtesy. And it may not be until the night before, but at least, you might have something. And so then start preparing your questions as much as you can, looking over things and just making a list of those ideas. I also recommend parents to not go by themselves. I mean, it doesn't have to be an advocate. Take your neighbor, whoever knows your kid and knows you, grandparent, just so that there's another person there, because it's so easy to be so emotionally, overwhelmed and the emotions get in the way and you're not even able to hear clearly. So to have a second person there is always really helpful.
I call it, I get into Papa Bear mode.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, and my wife kind of looks at me like, let's, take a deep breath.
Right.
But yeah, Darren's 100% right. I mean, it takes everything out of it. You want the best, for your son or daughter.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Right. And I know my former, my mentor is she's very big on the goals.
Mm-hmm.
And how important that is. What are your thoughts on the, like, look, from a parent's perspective, trying to get the right person to help you orchestrate the goal writing piece?
Yeah, the goals can be tricky. I've seen cases where, there's like 2 goals and they're crappy, honestly. And then I'm seeing cases where they've got like 18 goals. That's not necessarily meaningful either. Sometimes they're like goals that could be consolidated. So I recommend that parents really ask for samples and data, and each goal should have something in it that says where the kid is right now in that area. And so that you have something to measure. The goals should be measurable. They should be relevant to where their needs are at this moment. And they should also be goals that are going to help them to move on and be successful as they continue going on into transitioning and into adulthood. I think sometimes we get caught up in some of the little things and we don't see big picture. And then I also, I tell parents, the goals should be SMART. They should be specific and relevant. There should be some data there that could be easily measured by the next person who's maybe different, at school's new SLP, new whoever. It should be easy for the next person to pick up that goal and be able to understand it and measure it and continue on with your child.
Mm-hmm. So go ahead, Brian.
No, go ahead, Darren.
So from the perspective of, I know, like, they typically, as the meeting starts, right? So now let me backtrack for a second. So if I'm understanding you correctly, it's if I can, as a parent, I try to I say that helps me get a little bit more confidence and kind of see some of the language before I roll in, so it's not so overwhelming.
Yeah.
And then from what I remember in the last meeting, they started to kind of go over some of the assessments.
Mm-hmm.
And so that if I've seen one parent, eyes roll over, I've seen 1,000.
Yep.
And during that process where they're explaining the assessments, what are your thoughts on, like, the right questions to ask then? And is there too many questions to ask, or should you not ask any questions? What should you do there?
First of all, there's never too many questions asked, because legally the school is bound to facilitate parent involvement. And so if you need to ask questions, then they should be very willing and open for you to ask those questions and get your questions answered, because that is all about IDEA. It's all about a free and appropriate education, and you need to be able to be involved and so that you're able to help supervise that and help monitor that. When it's a time of an assessment, I say the same thing, ask for the assessment reports ahead of time as well. And usually those are ready before even an IEP document is. So it's a little easier to get those assessments ahead of time. And then I would ask questions like, did you observe my child in another setting? This just came up at another meeting where they worked with the kid, like, in a room for like an hour, and like that was it. Well, that's not a meaningful assessment. Did you see them in the classroom? Did you see them, if they're an older kid, did you see them in, math or PE or something? So I would really want to make sure that they got a clearer picture of your child in multiple environments. And I would also ask for information about, how is this assessment, how does it match with what's happening in the classroom? Because sometimes they just give a lot of standardized tests, but okay, if he's got auditory processing challenges or he's got, poor memory, how is that going to impact him in the classroom? What should we expect to see there? And so then the goals should tie to that.
Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of, so you have a blog post, article post that you wrote. that we'll definitely share in the show notes here, after. But, the one point, it was three things that every child needs in their IEP. Quality data drives the IEP. And it kind of, I know from our meeting that the one person was talking about how he's going to use a couple of different styles of testing. But maybe talk a little bit about that too.
Yeah, so you need that. You need multiple types of assessment. And I'm a big proponent of not just your standardized tests. Some kids have test anxiety. So if you give them a standardized test, they may freak out and not really perform to their maximum potential. So I like to see standardized tests done. I like to see observations in multiple settings. I like to see work samples of what the child has actually done in the classroom. I like to see maybe some just structured probes of typical kinds of work that they need to do in the class that was done. And also maybe some retests during the assessment where, okay, you've given them a test, maybe they did really poorly. Now actually teach them, use some strategies and see if that strategy works and see if that improves their score. Because if it does, and that's a real valuable strategy that the teachers can use in the classroom. So I think all of that kind of data is really important and can be used again to measure to see if your child is continuing to be successful in meeting their goals along the way.
Wow. Yeah.
So as it's interesting to hear your kind of your thought process. It's more global. So you're not rolling in there with a speech pathologist mindset and just looking for speech related goals and programs. You're really looking at the whole child.
I really am. It's so valuable. Let's say a kid has autism. A kid could have autism, but that autism and the way their brain works, that can impact their ability to take perspective. So in the English class, they may struggle to do their writing assignments because they can't take perspective and figure out why the character was motivated to do X, Y, Z. The autism could impact them on the playground, of course, with the social piece. You can't just look at a diagnosis or a challenge and just kind of look at it in one way. I think you've really got to look at the whole child and how they're impacted. And I think this is important too, because teams, they want to interpret the law and say that, a child only qualifies if they have their disability adversely impacts their academic progress. But what the law really says is if their disability impacts their educational progress. And the educational progress covers so many areas. It covers their social emotional well-being at school. It covers their ability to make friends and to work well in a group. So if we're thinking about what the law says, which is the educational performance, then we've got to look at all the areas that touch that child during that school day.
Excellent. Look, I have a kind of a catch-22 question for you.
Okay.
Right. So one of the thoughts that I've heard from other professionals is the label is necessary in order to get the services from the school. What I've seen from some parents is, I don't want the label because I don't want my child to be, put into a box. How do you bridge the gap between calling something for the sake of getting something, or what's your theory on labels, just kind of across the board there?
You know what? It's a tricky subject. Some people are very passionate about that, and I have seen kids in high school without a label, and I could spend 5 minutes with that kid and I know what that kid's label would be if it was one, But what I believe is, label or no label, as long as the child is receiving the appropriate services that they are supposed to have, then I'm okay with that. So, for example, if a parent has never, I use autism a lot, but if a parent has never actually gotten the autism diagnosis on paper, and so that label isn't there, maybe the child on his IEP, it says like other health impaired, or it says specific learning disability. I don't care what it says on there. As long as that kid is getting, the proper accommodations, they're getting the proper goals in their communication, as long as all of that is on there, then I'm okay with them not having the actual label on paper at the school. But what I will say is outside of school, when a kid is over 18, if they don't have the label, you might struggle with getting the right services as an adult.
Oh, that's good input.
Yeah.
Yeah, and from what I can gather from my own kind of personal experience, that's ever evolving, correct? Is the label, and especially when it comes to the autism spectrum.
It is, and I want to say, especially when our kiddos are little, they kind of hesitate to put the label because it could be so many things, and especially if they're I don't want to say high functioning because I don't like that term, but especially if they're speaking, if they have language and all that, it could be a lot of things when they're little. And so, I went to a conference yesterday actually where they talk about not until age 9 do you really understand and get a sense of where more so of the trajectory of that child as they're going to move on into teenagers and adulthood. Before that, it's really hard to say. They're still developing some of that social awareness and some of the other pieces. So, and then as kids get older too, I've seen kids who were, non-speaking and under the table. And then by the time I'm reading their reports from back in the day, and then when I work with them in middle school, the kid is in like seminar classes, like high level classes. So you don't know, you never know where the kid's going to go, where depending from one kid to another. So I know that can make parents kind of hesitate too. It's like, well, I don't want to put a label on because that might stunt where the school would be willing to take them so far as their progress and their expectations and such things. So I get that.
Quick. I mean, they're so, that I think that's where I'm frustrated as a parent is that there's such a quick movement to check the box.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And I agree with your approach to it of let's get the plan in place,
yes. Uh-huh.
especially at that 7, 8, 9-year-old level.
Oh, yeah.
And then eventually, because when we went, on the clinical side with the psychologist, with the neurologist, she was very quick to check the box. And Darren kind of caught a lot of my frustrations with this, and I said, but I got her to admit she was really just checking the box for insurance purposes. And I said, that's just not fair in that sense. And I'd rather, let's figure out, first how we can help him and then maybe check the box later.
Right. No, I agree. I think what's most meaningful is giving the child the supports that they need. Unfortunately, sometimes that comes along with the label. If they have a certain label, they get a certain level of supports, and they don't get it if they don't have a label. It's really an unfortunate state in our healthcare, and in our services at this time in this country. But unfortunately, that is kind of what you deal with.
And that's often can be, it needs to be that way for a workaround, be able to get to what you need. Look, I think the biggest thing that resounded with me was from that blog post was that, make sure that this is something that you as a parent can explain.
Yes.
And that is something I will definitely take to the table when we return. And is that, anything with your child when they're needing help and it's above your knowledge base, it should be something that you could explain to, fellow family members or a neighbor or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I wanted that to be number one in the blog post. She's like, well, let's give them the meat of it and then we'll put that at the end. But I'm like, as long as it's in there, because it's like reading somebody's thesis or their doctoral, thing. Sometimes reading these IEPs, it's ridiculous, and and it bothers me too because there's sometimes, you guys are educated people. You have people who are really educated in their area of, whatever that they do, accountants or whatever. So, these are smart people. It should be that you should be able to explain the IEP in a way that they should understand,
Absolutely. It's interesting that you said that you were talking about services a couple of minutes ago. And I found in my experience that we spend so much energy on trying to understand kind of what we call the meat of the assessment and all the documents, that we forget about the last page, which basically is the goals and the services.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes from a parent's perspective, you really have to you have to be reasonable about what you're expecting the school to do, I think is one thing. Sometimes they're not giving you everything that you would want. And in some cases, they don't necessarily have that. And I know California has different laws about non-public schools and non-public agencies and so on and so forth. But sometimes it's a matter of, like in my case, I know my school and my son needs more of an occupational therapist, but not necessarily for handwriting. And the schools, that's what their focus is on fine motor. And so I need to go out and go private and find that right therapist. So what's your thought on kind of like that last piece, that service piece? What are you thinking?
Yeah, and that's, unfortunately, that's what happens. Like, you spend so much time talking about all the assessments and, present levels and all that stuff. And then at the very end, it's like, okay, and as a result, he's got these 5 goals and he's got these people providing service, sign the IEP. And we don't spend a lot of time there. Sometimes it's worth having a second meeting, though, to discuss that. Sometimes it's just that meaningful.
And you can have a second meeting, right?
Have as many meetings as you want as a parent.
You don't have to sign off on the IEP.
You do not. I think that's one of the biggest points that parents are always like, are you kidding? Like, you feel the pressure to sign, but legally you're not required to sign. You're not required to sign at all. But this is the caveat I tell parents: until you do sign, nothing that you have agreed upon in that new IEP will be implemented. So you can take your time, but just know that, none of that new stuff's going to happen. What you can also do, though, is you can sign that I consent to this, start the speech, start this, but I don't consent to the other parts. So you could even sign for just like part of it. That's another thing you can do.
That's a nice go-between, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because some things are really obvious. I mean, that this needs to carry on from last year, but then as a child gets older and developmentally has more needs, there's bigger gaps to fill, so to speak. So that's brilliant. As a parent, what are you thinking of all this, Brian?
I just think I have to remind myself and that it is, it's not a static document. It's going to continue to grow. It's not one signature and done. And you have to, I think ultimately, when I think advocate, I think you're helping, the rights or the rights of the parent and then ultimately of the child, which can get intimidated down or suppressed by the process.
Yeah. That is, the goal is to have, talk about to parents, you should be the CEO of that IEP team. You know your child best, and as your child gets older, they should be taking a larger role as well, especially as they get into those teenage years, those last few years of high school. But yeah, you should be, I talk about this. Special education, it's a business. And so we need to operate as if it is a business. If somebody came to your house and said they're going to, do drywall in your house, they're going to give you a contract and they're going to say what they're going to do. And then you're going to go back and inspect it and make sure they did it. Same thing with education. There's an IEP, it's a contract. You should be able to ask questions about that. You should be able to hold them accountable. And if they're not, then you should be able to come to the table and let's find out how to figure this out, why these things aren't happening. It's the same kind of a process. And I think we need to look at it that way, not in an adversarial way, but just as a matter of fact, it's a business. And you should be the head of that company for your child.
I'm trying to figure out how you have all the time to do everything you're doing.
Let me tell you, we just live it and breathe it in my house. So, I mean, my daughter will tell you, I'm surprised she didn't come out here. She will tell you, mommy helps autism parents and I have autism and ADHD. And it's it's just what we do. Sometimes I used to teach classes here because I have a studio office at my house, and she would come and she would pass out papers. I mean, you know, this is just what we do here.
Wow.
Excellent. Well, if you want to videotape one of those trainings, I'm sure our audience would love to participate.
That'd be awesome. That'd be awesome. It is my goal to stretch beyond California this year. So, that'd be great.
Well, why don't, you're a true advocate, for parents. So why share with our listeners kind of how they can find out more, if they need your help.
Yes, definitely. So you can find my website at sdautismhelp.com. So SD like San Diego, autismhelp.com. There you can find out all about my advocacy services. I offer an advocacy package where I support parents and do that audit and analysis of their IEP, and I prep them to go to the meeting themselves. And then I also have a comprehensive package where I do all the prepping, and then we go to the meeting together, depending on what parents' comfort level is. I also teach classes, as I said, on a bi-monthly basis for parents in an IEP boot camp, as well as I do blogging, writing, speaking. And so you can find all that out on the website, or you can always email me, info@sdautismhelp.com.
Awesome. And we'll, like I said before, we'll make sure we get all that information into the show notes, and we've kind of put together an episode companion with this for folks to download. Really, I mean, Crystal, thank you very much. A really great talking with you. Got me fired up, even though it's late in the East here where we are. But thank you. Yeah, we really you're a true resource for parents, and we appreciate you being on.
I know, wealth of knowledge. Excellent.
Yep.
Great. So happy to help. And if parents need any kind of help, even in New York, I'm willing to, email me your IEP and we can do it over the phone. I can help as much as I can.
Awesome. That's what I was going to ask. So yeah, no boundaries there. You're able to help folks, kind of across the country, correct?
Yes, definitely.
Awesome. So we appreciate it. We'd absolutely love to have you back to kind of continue this conversation in the future. And but Crystal Sanford, we appreciate you having me on.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Sound Foundations for Parenting podcast with your hosts, Darren and Brian. Find them on social media at Sound Foundations for Parenting. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review and subscribe. And we'll catch you next time on the Sound Foundations for Parenting podcast.